July 2nd, 2013. Ashwood, North Carolina. A sanitation worker lifted the lid of a trash bin behind the quiet Ashwood Court apartments and froze. Inside, wrapped in black plastic, was a woman's torso. Her head, arms, and legs missing. The discovery sent a chill through this small law school town, where neighbors once shared coffee, study notes, and trust. Days later, the victim was identified as Rachel Donovan, a 27-year-old law graduate with a promising future and no known enemies. Her disappearance shattered the illusion of safety. Classrooms turned silent, vigils filled the park, and the community mourned a light that had gone out too soon. For years, the case stayed cold. No witness, no weapon, just fragments, a hacksaw, a master key, and the faint outline of a neighbor's shadow, until one detail, overlooked for years, brought detectives back to the boy next door. This is the silence of Ashwood Court, a story of obsession, betrayal, and justice delayed. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and stay with us. Because in this story, the truth didn't stay buried. It was watching from across the hall. No one in Ashwood, North Carolina, woke up that July morning expecting the air to be heavy with dread. The sun rose over the low-slung roofs of Ashwood Court apartments, where days usually began quietly. The drone of lawnmowers, the occasional thud of basketballs on cracked pavement, the faint laughter of law students letting off steam between finals. But by sunrise, a different kind of tension pressed in on the complex, the kind that made even the birds fall silent. Earl Jenkins had worked the sanitation route for 15 years. He knew every alley, every cracked sidewalk, every face that peeked out from behind curtains as his truck groaned through its rounds. But on that humid morning, the routine shattered when he reached the last row of roll-away bins behind Ashwood Court. The bins always reeked of old pizza, beer cans, and late-night takeout. But today, something foul pushed through even the thick air, sharp and rotten, crawling down into his lungs. Earl muttered under his breath, tugged at his work gloves, and braced himself as he rolled the offending bin toward the truck. As he gripped the lid and heaved it open, the world seemed to narrow to a single, nauseating instant. Inside, tightly wound in black plastic, was a mass that shouldn't have fit in any household bin. At first, Earl thought it was a pile of torn garbage bags, but the shape was wrong, unnatural. The plastic glistened, sticky with something dark that wasn't just spilled soda or barbecue sauce. Instinct screamed at him, but he forced himself to look closer, his breath hitching. There, exposed in a gap where the bag hadn't been tied off, pale skin. Human skin. Earl staggered back, bile rising in his throat. He fumbled for his phone, hands trembling, and called 911 with words that tumbled over each other, barely coherent. Within minutes, the narrow lane behind the apartments filled with blue lights and the warble of sirens. Officers moved quickly to cordon off the area, shouting at bystanders to stay clear as the trash bin became the center of a silent, swelling storm. The first responders worked with grim efficiency, but nothing could mask their horror. What they found inside the bag was a woman's torso, carefully severed, stripped of identity. Her head, arms, and legs were missing. The brutality of it sent a ripple through the gathered police, the news crews now circling like vultures just beyond the tape. A lone detective snapped photos while others whispered, speculating quietly as the morning crowd thickened. No one knew yet who she was, only that her death had been concealed in the most mundane of places, the garbage meant to be carried away and forgotten. By noon, Ashwood Court was locked down. The local news van idled nearby, its antenna jutting like a warning finger at the sky. Reporters paced restlessly, rehearsing their opening lines, desperate for any scrap of information. "Who is she?" they asked, microphones aimed at officers who offered nothing but steely silence. Residents, bleary-eyed and anxious, clustered in doorways and behind windows. The police swept the grounds, knocking on doors, gathering statements, searching for any sign of a struggle or a witness willing to speak. Every corner, every stairwell became a piece of the crime scene. Detective Martha Lane, recently transferred from Raleigh, took charge. Her eyes scanned the apartment balconies above, noting the mix of faded banners and overgrown planters, the telltale signs of students too busy or too stressed to care about curb appeal. She moved with practiced calm, jotting down observations in her notebook. The direction of the sun, the precise placement of the bin, the way the other trash had been arranged to conceal it. She noticed a faint smear of red on the concrete, almost washed away by the morning dew. A neighbor, Mrs. Grady from 2C, claimed she'd heard a noise in the middle of the night. A thump, a scuffle, maybe just raccoons. Another swore she saw nothing unusual. Most kept their heads down, unwilling to get involved. But a few whispered the same thing. Whoever had done this had planned carefully, moving under cover of darkness, slipping in and out unseen. As the afternoon sun scorched the parking lot, a rumor spread among the students. The victim might be one of their own. Names buzzed through the complex, each syllable weighted with fear. Some said it was the girl in 3A, always so studious, rarely seen at parties. Others guessed it might be a stranger, someone dumped here to send a message. Every theory seemed more terrifying than the last. All day, the police combed through trash bags, tracing every scrap, searching for the missing pieces. Each new discovery, a torn receipt, a clump of hair, a single high heel, added layers to the growing sense of horror. The medical examiner worked silently, documenting every detail, trying to piece together an identity from the shattered remains. By nightfall, the media coverage had exploded. Ashwood, a town that prided itself on being safe, suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Apartment doors were double-locked, curtains drawn tight. Parents called their children, voices shaking, demanding updates. The university sent out a statement urging students to stay alert and cooperate with authorities. And all the while the question echoed, relentless and cold. Who was she? And who among them had done this? The answer to the question that haunted Ashwood Court came sooner than anyone expected. By the second day, investigators released the first detail about the victim. She was a young woman, likely in her mid to late 20s. That sliver of information hit the complex like a shockwave. Residents traded nervous glances, whispering names, checking in on friends. In apartment 3A, the lights never flicked on, and the blinds stayed closed. By noon, the victim's identity was confirmed. Rachel Donovan, age 27. Rachel had moved to Ashwood a year before. A fresh face with bright eyes and a relentless drive. She was the kind of person whose reputation spread ahead of her. Ambitious, fiercely intelligent, a source of inspiration and maybe a little envy for her peers. She'd just graduated from Brookhaven Law School at the top of her class. Her professors described her as unfailingly kind, unwavering in her principles, and sharper than any cross-examiner I've seen. In every photo that surfaced in news stories and social media feeds, Rachel's smile was confident and unguarded, her gaze direct. Her dreams were as large as her work ethic. Rachel had wanted to become a criminal defense attorney, not for the money or prestige, but because she believed, with a near naive purity, that everyone deserved a voice. She volunteered in legal aid clinics, spent weekends mentoring undergrads, and rarely turned down a plea for help. Friends remembered how she'd driven across the state to support a classmate at a court appearance, and how, even on her worst days, she insisted on bringing coffee for others before taking care of herself. Yet Rachel wasn't reckless. She lived alone in apartment 3A, and she lived carefully. Neighbors sometimes joked about her routines, the way she double-checked her locks, left lights on timers, kept her phone close at hand. There was a certain methodical neatness to her life. Books arranged alphabetically, notes color-coded, schedules planned out to the hour. Some called it neurotic. Others saw it as discipline. Rachel herself just called it being prepared. It was this carefulness that made her disappearance so jarring. On the evening of June 25th, Rachel sent a last email to her boyfriend Tom, who was working in Atlanta for the summer. "I'm going offline for a few days to study," she wrote. "Bar prep is kicking my butt. I need to focus. Miss you." It was brief but upbeat, typical of her, a blend of determination and gentle reassurance. That was the last anyone would hear from her. In the days that followed, Rachel's friends respected her wishes, assuming she was buried under casebooks and outlines. But as messages went unanswered, concerns quietly multiplied. Texts stacked up, unanswered. Her mailbox filled with letters, including one from her mother, who was known to send handwritten notes just to brighten Rachel's day. The hallways of Ashwood Court seemed emptier without her measured footsteps and cheerful greetings. As the investigation widened, more details emerged, painting a portrait both intimate and tragic. Rachel's life, once so full of promise, had been interrupted in a moment no one could have foreseen. Police scoured her apartment for clues, noting how nothing appeared out of place, not at first. The bed was neatly made, her study desk organized except for a single cold cup of coffee and an open laptop filled with highlighted notes for the bar exam. There were no signs of forced entry. Her bar exam permit, the ticket to the culmination of years of sacrifice, still lay unsent on the kitchen table. The forensic team moved methodically, dusting for prints, taking samples from doorknobs, window frames, and every surface in sight. It was as if her routines, her habits, had worked against her. There was no sign of a struggle, nothing to suggest she'd ever opened her door to danger. But behind this apparent order, small details hinted at deeper currents. On her living room table sat a half-written letter addressed to Daniel. The handwriting was Rachel's, crisp, confident, with the same blue ink she favored. The message read, "Daniel, thank you for helping me with that criminal procedure chapter." It trailed off mid-sentence, the pen mark ending abruptly, as if something had interrupted her. Outside, reporters pressed for answers. Rachel's classmates, stunned and heartbroken, began holding vigils in the park behind the apartments. Candles flickered under the night sky, photos of Rachel taped to trees and lampposts. Some students spoke softly about her generosity, her ability to calm even the most anxious around exam time. Others confessed to a creeping fear that something dark had always lingered on the edges of their safe, academic world. Rachel's parents, traveling from out of state, arrived in Ashwood Court only to be greeted by yellow tape and the sight of strangers sorting through their daughter's life. They clung to each other in silent agony, replaying every memory, every conversation, searching for clues in hindsight. The community's grief deepened as the media released images of Rachel. Her graduation photo, her first court internship, her favorite coffee shop. Each picture seemed to echo with lost potential. And still, beneath the surface, suspicion grew. Police quietly began asking about Rachel's relationships, her friends, rivals, and neighbors. They scrutinized her routines, her messages, her every step. One name recurred in interviews, mentioned by several classmates and neighbors alike: Daniel Merritt, the boy next door. But that was a question for another day. For now, all Ashwood could do was mourn the loss of the brightest future in Brookhaven. A voice of justice, silenced before it could even begin. 3 days after Rachel Donovan's last email, a quiet dread began to settle over Ashwood Court. In any close-knit building, absence is noticed: a missing face at the mailbox, the silence where there should be music, the unanswered knock at a door. For those who knew Rachel's disciplined nature, her sudden disappearance sent alarms that no one wanted to voice out loud. It started with small signs. Her best friend, Naomi, stopped by to drop off flashcards and found Rachel's door locked, lights off. Naomi waited a while, listening for footsteps, the sound of a chair scraping as Rachel always did when standing to greet a visitor. Nothing. She texted, then called, the ringtone echoing in the empty hallway. Eventually, she left a note tucked under the mat, just in case Rachel returned while she was gone. The next day, Rachel missed a study group she had organized herself, a rarity. Her group messaged her phone repeatedly, concern morphing into a knot of fear. The following morning, the building manager received calls from both classmates and Rachel's worried mother. He agreed to check on her, finding the same locked door, no movement inside, mail piling up. He hesitated to push further, but the uneasy consensus grew. Something was very wrong. On the third evening, the Ashwood police arrived. The sun was dipping behind the pines, casting elongated shadows over the faded bricks as the officers made their way up the steps to 3A. They knocked first, waited, then knocked harder. No answer. With the building manager's key in hand, they attempted to open the door. It wouldn't budge. The deadbolt was thrown from inside. An officer peered through the peephole and saw nothing but stillness. Forced to act, they radioed for permission to breach. In a careful motion, they jimmied the door open. The apartment was still and strangely preserved, as if Rachel had simply stepped out for coffee and would return any minute. Inside, the first thing that struck them was the cold cup of coffee on the desk, a film of dust skimming its surface. The laptop was still open, illuminating a wall of meticulously typed notes and a to-do list. A pen lay nearby, ink tip dried out, as though dropped mid-thought. Across the table, Rachel's bar exam permit, never submitted, rested atop a stack of law journals, an abandoned passport to her dreams. Nothing seemed violently disturbed. The bed was tidy, her favorite sweater draped neatly over the footboard. The window was locked from the inside, blinds drawn. Her shoes were lined up in perfect pairs beside the closet, except for one, her pink flats, missing from the row. The apartment exuded order, the type built from years of careful habit. Yet the very lack of disruption unnerved the officers, as if whatever had happened here had been carefully managed. They expanded the search, examining every inch for clues. A strange detail emerged. The building's security cameras, installed on every floor after a string of petty thefts the previous fall, had lost power the same night Rachel went missing. All footage from that window of time had vanished, a blank gap in the record. When questioned, The building manager shook his head. "We had a storm that night. Must have tripped the system," he said. But the timing felt almost surgical. Neighbors provided patchwork recollections. Most remembered Rachel's routines, but one, a nervous second-year student who lived across the hall, admitted seeing a flicker of light through Rachel's window at around 2 in the morning, just a brief, darting beam like a flashlight. He'd assumed it was Rachel, burning the midnight oil, lost in case law. No strange noises, no sign of forced entry, nothing but the faint smell of her vanilla-scented candle wafting into the corridor. A search of her mailbox revealed another clue. Among bills and coupons was a letter, half-written, in Rachel's elegant handwriting. Addressed to Daniel, it read, "Daniel, thank you for helping me with that criminal procedure chapter." The sentence trailed off in a hurried scrawl. Investigators later wondered if the interruption that halted the letter marked the moment her ordinary life was shattered. Days blurred as friends, police, and Rachel's family retraced her steps, scoured phone records, and reviewed every interaction from her last week. Her boyfriend Tom, devastated and helpless from Atlanta, answered questions over the phone, racking his memory for anything unusual. Each answer only deepened the mystery. Residents, once friendly and open, now eyed each other with suspicion. Apartment doors were bolted, conversations cut short. The local coffee shop removed Rachel's reserved study table, leaving an empty chair as a silent memorial. Candles and flowers collected outside 3A, while rumors crept through the halls like a cold draft. Everyone speculated, but no one knew. The sense of unease grew heavier when investigators learned that the master power for the security cameras was housed in the basement, accessible only with a special key. Only a handful of people had access. The manager, a few maintenance workers, and possibly trusted tenants who'd helped in emergencies before. The police pressed further, compiling a list of everyone who had access, everyone who might have seen Rachel that night. Ashwood Court was no longer just a quiet student haven. It had become a maze of questions, every locked door and empty room echoing with the terror of what might have happened behind them. And through it all, Rachel's apartment remained untouched, a meticulously kept sanctuary interrupted by a single, inexplicable vanishing. A story that, for now, had more shadows than answers. Ashwood Court had always felt like a cocoon to Daniel Merritt. Apartment 3B was his haven, a place to disappear into casebooks, video games, and the steady hum of his own routines. He was quiet, diligent, and always a little awkward around crowds. But with Rachel living next door, his world had shifted. They were classmates first. Late nights in the library, study sessions that stretched long past midnight. Rachel, with her brilliant mind and easy laugh, seemed to radiate the confidence Daniel lacked. She was the sun to his orbit, bright enough to light even his most anxious thoughts. But now, with Rachel gone and suspicion clouding every interaction, Daniel found himself thrust into a harsh glare he'd never wanted. The police came to his door within hours of confirming Rachel's identity. They asked about the last time he'd seen her, if he'd noticed anything strange, if she'd mentioned feeling threatened. Daniel answered with trembling hands, eyes darting between the officers and the wall that separated his apartment from Rachel's. He told them about their last conversation, a tense debate over a mock trial case, nothing out of the ordinary. He insisted she'd seemed fine, just stressed about the bar. He left out the detail about the way she'd seemed distant, how she'd stopped responding to his late-night texts, how her laughter had grown rarer around him. Daniel was the first among the residents to alert others that Rachel was missing. He'd knocked on her door the morning after she went silent, left a voicemail for the building manager, even texted Naomi, feigning casual concern. When the news broke about the torso in the trash, he hovered near the entrance, eyes glued to his phone, jumping at every siren that screamed down the street. His worry seemed genuine, at least to most people. But when a local reporter, desperate for a quote, cornered him near the mailbox and asked if he and Rachel were close, Daniel hesitated. "I don't think she really had close friends," he said, voice flat, almost mechanical. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. It was a strange thing to say about someone you'd spent so many late nights with, and the reporter's eyebrows arched just enough to suggest she'd noticed. The quote made its way onto the local news that evening, fueling the already swirling storm of gossip and suspicion. That afternoon, a national TV crew arrived, their cameras capturing every tearful hug, every whisper exchanged between students on the lawn. Daniel found himself swept up in the chaos. He agreed to a short interview, his nerves frayed raw. He tried to keep his answers careful, but as the anchor recounted the grisly details live on air, a producer slipped him a note. Body found behind Ashwood, possibly Rachel Donovan. The color drained from Daniel's face. Cameras caught every twitch of his jaw, every dart of his eyes, the beads of sweat breaking out on his brow. He stammered, voice barely audible. I need to go." The footage would be replayed for days, an uncomfortable, stuttering portrait of a young man under pressure, his guilt or grief debated by strangers across the country. Word spread quickly. Online forums dissected every second of Daniel's interview, screen-grabbing the moment his face shifted from feigned calm to raw panic. Some called him a murderer. Others saw only a scared, socially awkward student caught in an unbearable situation. But for the police, the performance raised questions. Daniel had volunteered for every interview, inserted himself into the search, but seemed oddly detached when talking about Rachel. Officers took note. Behind closed doors, neighbors whispered. Some remembered seeing Daniel standing in the hall, ear pressed to Rachel's door, back when her laughter was still a regular sound in Ashwood's corridors. Others recalled how he'd once gotten locked out of his apartment, and Rachel had let him crash on her couch. "He was always around her," one resident remarked, "but she never mentioned dating anyone." For the detectives, Daniel's presence was both a lead and a puzzle. His alibi for the night of Rachel's disappearance was thin. He claimed to have been home studying, playing video games, chatting in a law school group chat that had gone silent after midnight. When pressed, he grew defensive, insisting he was just a concerned friend, yet his words, so carefully measured, seemed to tremble with a deeper anxiety. Late that evening, as the investigation deepened, police asked Daniel to walk them through his version of events, hour by hour, minute by minute. He faltered, mixing up times, contradicting earlier statements. When shown the unfinished letter in Rachel's mailbox, addressed to him, he froze. I don't remember her writing that," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. The officers exchanged glances, quietly marking his reactions in their notebooks. Meanwhile, Ashwood Court's residents grew restless. The campus listserv overflowed with rumors, wild theories, and unverified sightings. Some insisted Daniel was being framed, the scapegoat for an ugly crime. Others whispered that no one really knew what he was capable of. The truth was, no one really knew anyone in those narrow halls, least of all the boy next door. By nightfall, The clip of Daniel's on-camera reaction had gone viral, his pale, sweating face a new symbol of the tragedy. For investigators, it was a puzzle piece, but not the final picture. Not yet. As darkness pressed in over Ashwood Court, suspicion swirled like fog, and the line between friend and suspect grew thinner with every whispered word. With Daniel Merritt now at the center of both public suspicion and police inquiry, the investigation at Ashwood Court shifted into relentless overdrive. Detective Martha Lane returned each morning, her shoes echoing through the stairwells, accompanied by a rotating team of forensics experts and officers. Their search was no longer a question of if a crime had occurred, but how. And most crucially, whether the secrets of Rachel Donovan's last night could be pried loose from behind the bland brick walls. For 3 days, every inch of the complex became a potential crime scene. Residents' routines were shattered by police tape, the sharp scent of fingerprint powder, and the metallic taste of fear. Forensics officers in white suits descended on the basement first, combing through its dim corridors lined with storage cages and water heaters. In a far corner, behind a stack of old boxes, one officer found a metal hacksaw. The blade was sticky with dried blood and embedded with what looked like strands of long brown hair. The hacksaw was tagged and bagged with clinical efficiency, but it was only the first in a string of discoveries. DNA analysis would later confirm the blood and hair matched Rachel Donovan. The implications chilled everyone in the room. The murder hadn't been a chaotic, impulsive act. It was methodical, gruesome, carried out by someone who knew how to hide things in plain sight. Someone who'd calculated their moves down to the last, horrific detail. Attention next turned to Daniel's apartment, 3B. The officers had been inside before, noting his careful tidiness, the neat rows of law books, the stacks of empty ramen bowls beside his desk. This time, though, the search was exhaustive. They peeled back rugs, ran gloved hands along every shelf, opened cabinets and drawers with clinical precision. The breakthrough came when an officer, tapping along the wall behind Daniel's piston, heard a hollow echo. Prizing away a loose panel, he found a small USB drive, the kind easily overlooked or discarded. Back at the station, detectives plugged the drive into a secure terminal, expecting perhaps old classwork or personal notes. Instead, what unfolded chilled even the most hardened among them. The drive contained hundreds of videos, meticulously organized by date and time. Their subject was always the same: Rachel Donovan, filmed without her knowledge. The footage showed her sleeping, studying in her pajamas, singing softly to herself as she cooked dinner. Some clips zoomed through her window, others from strange angles, hidden cameras, placed with unsettling forethought. There were videos from the hallway, too, Rachel locking and unlocking her door, sometimes pausing to glance over her shoulder, her posture tense. The officers watched her routines become more cautious as spring turned to summer, her blinds pulled tighter, her phone checked more frequently. She seemed to sense, on some level, the eyes that followed her. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. On Daniel's laptop, tucked inside a folder labeled innocuously as Bar Prep, investigators found a chilling series of files: Rachel's study habits, night routine, and most disturbing of all, final plan. The last document was a journal-like script, written in Daniel's careful, blocky font. Each entry cataloged Rachel's movements, her moods, what she wore, even what time she turned off her lamp each night. The final lines read, "If I can't have her, no one will." Detectives recoiled at the sentence, a single phrase that cut through all ambiguity, all feigned innocence. It was more than obsession. It was a declaration. Returning to the physical evidence, officers went through the hacksaw again, now with heightened scrutiny. Wedged between the serrated teeth, they found a scrap of pink fabric, stained and ragged. Rachel's friends quickly confirmed it matched the color of the dress she'd last been seen wearing, a vibrant pink she'd chosen for good luck on study days. The fabric, tiny and bloodied, was enough to link the tool directly to the crime. One final piece completed the puzzle. In Daniel's closet, wedged behind old boxes of textbooks, police found a master key, an all-access pass that could open any apartment in the building. The building manager, when questioned, admitted only a handful existed. Daniel had never been issued one. No one could say for certain when or how he'd acquired it. But now, with this key, the story was inescapable. Daniel could have entered Rachel's apartment at any time, night or day, unseen by neighbors or cameras. The evidence mounted into a story of obsession and methodical planning. Daniel was brought in for questioning again, this time not as a neighbor or friend, but as the prime suspect. His hands, the officers noticed, bore small scratches and bruises, traces of a violent struggle. He denied everything at first, voice wavering, insisting he was being set up. But the evidence was too heavy, too damning to dismiss. Ashwood Court, once a haven for young hopes, now felt suffocating with dread. Residents spoke in whispers, doors locked tighter than ever, eyes lingering on each other just a moment too long. The dream of safety was shattered, replaced by a single, inescapable truth. Behind every wall, every locked door, secrets waited. And sometimes, the greatest danger was not the stranger outside, but the boy next door. The arrest came swiftly, almost anticlimactic after the days of relentless suspicion. On the humid morning of June 30th, Daniel Merritt was handcuffed outside Ashwood Court, his face pale and drawn, lips pressed into a stubborn line. Neighbors peered from behind curtains as he was led away, a stark contrast to the quiet, bookish figure who'd once seemed invisible in their midst. Cameras captured every moment, the news cycle hungry for images of the man now cast as a monster. At first, Daniel clung to his innocence with desperate ferocity. He answered questions with the same rehearsed composure he'd shown during the interviews, insisting that he was being framed. "I never hurt Rachel," he repeated, his eyes darting between detectives, looking for a hint of sympathy, a chink in their professional armor. But his hands betrayed him, scratches and bruises crusted along his knuckles, matching the fresh defensive wounds documented on Rachel's body. The silence in the interrogation room grew heavy, broken only by the clicking of pens and the hum of the air conditioner. Detective Lane kept her questions steady, circling around Daniel's story until cracks began to show. She read aloud passages from his journal, played a few seconds of the most damning videos, and slid the evidence folder across the table. Daniel stared at his hands, his jaw clenched tight. When she produced the master key and the hacksaw, still flecked with dried blood and pink fibers, Daniel's facade seemed to buckle. The evidence was overwhelming, unyielding, irrefutable. The days dragged on as Daniel waited in county lockup, the world shrinking to the rhythm of fluorescent lights and the distant clatter of doors. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. His parents, summoned from out of state, sat across from him behind glass, their faces drawn and broken. "Tell them the truth, Daniel," his mother pleaded, but he only shook his head, eyes unfocused, lost somewhere beyond the concrete walls. Weeks passed before the confession came. It was delivered not with drama, but with a numb resignation. A 12-page handwritten account that arrived folded and tear-stained in Detective Lane's inbox. The letter was rambling, alternating between self-pity and self-loathing, but within its tangled prose, the grim truth emerged. Daniel described how he'd watched Rachel for months, slipping the master key from the building manager's tool closet during a brief window of opportunity. He became obsessed with the idea of being close to her, of knowing her every movement. On the night of June 25th, unable to contain his compulsion any longer, he entered her apartment as she slept, his heart pounding in his throat. He wrote that he'd only wanted to talk, to make her understand, to erase the distance that had grown between them. But Rachel awoke with a start. Her confusion turned to terror when she saw him standing above her bed, key in hand. She screamed, sharp, raw, desperate, a sound that Daniel said wouldn't stop echoing. Panicked, he lunged, grabbing the nearest thing within reach, a length of workout rope she kept by her door for exercise. The struggle was brief, violent, and final. Rachel's fight left scratch marks down Daniel's arms, her last act of resistance. When it was over, the room was silent except for Daniel's ragged breathing and the thud of his own guilt. What followed was cold, methodical. In the hours before dawn, Daniel wrapped Rachel's body in plastic, moving with a strange calm. He used the hacksaw from the basement to dismember her remains, working in silence as the sun crept up behind closed blinds. He chose the trash bin behind the building because he believed it would be collected at first light, a calculated plan to erase all evidence before anyone could suspect. But fate had other plans. That morning, a traffic accident at the edge of town delayed the garbage truck's route by several hours. Earl Jenkins, the sanitation worker, arrived later than usual and noticed the stench, the tiny, arbitrary twist that unraveled everything Daniel thought he'd controlled. The body was found, the search began, and Daniel's carefully constructed facade collapsed piece by piece. The confession brought neither catharsis nor understanding. Daniel never apologized, never expressed remorse for the horror he unleashed. He simply recounted the facts, cataloging the mechanics of his obsession and the final, fatal act. "If I can't have her, no one will," he wrote again in shaky script, as if the phrase could explain everything. For Rachel's family, the confession was both a relief and a wound reopened. They had answers, but nothing that could bring their daughter back. Nothing to dull the ache of loss that would linger long after Daniel's words faded from memory. The law would take its course, but for the community at Ashwood Court, innocence was gone. The safe, familiar world had shifted forever, torn apart by a darkness that had lived right next door. The summer heat was relentless as Daniel Merritt's trial began, drawing national attention to the Ashwood courthouse. Satellite trucks lined the curb, reporters jostled for position under the magnolias, and crowds gathered, desperate to glimpse the accused. Inside the marble halls, a hush fell as the prosecution laid out their case, not simply a tale of murder, but of obsession, control, and the violation of safety itself. Daniel, shackled and gaunt in a wrinkled suit, sat at the defense table, eyes fixed on his folded hands. He looked nothing like the man who'd once shuffled through law school corridors. No books, no shy smile, just a haunted stare, the weight of the crime pressing on him as surely as the cuffs around his wrists. Across the aisle, Rachel's parents clung together, their grief barely contained. The prosecution wasted no time. They presented the evidence in a grim, unyielding sequence. The hacked security cameras, the master key found in Daniel's closet, the hacksaw bearing traces of blood and pink fibers. Forensic analysts detailed how Rachel's remains had been dismembered with clinical precision. Each photograph, each diagram, was a blow, reminders of the horror that had once been a daughter, a friend, a future. But it was the digital evidence that left the deepest mark. The USB drive's voyeuristic videos were played for the jury, each one a violation, each one erasing the illusion of privacy and safety. Footage of Rachel sleeping, showering, humming to herself as she made tea, her life documented, dissected, and stored by the man who'd lived only feet away. The courtroom was silent as the files were shown, many jurors averting their eyes, some quietly weeping. The prosecution called it what it was: a record of obsession, not affection, a blueprint for murder, not love. The most damning exhibit was Daniel's own writing. A forensic computer analyst read aloud from Final Plan, his document chronicling Rachel's habits, her routines, his intentions. "If I can't have her, no one will." The phrase echoed off the walls, seeping into every corner of the room. Even Daniel's own defense attorneys seemed rattled as the words hung in the air. When the prosecution rested, the defense tried to shift the narrative. Their strategy was desperation. They called experts to testify that Daniel suffered from erotomania, a rare delusional disorder. He believed Rachel loved him back, despite clear evidence to the contrary, one psychologist testified. The defense painted Daniel as lost in fantasy, incapable of understanding the real boundaries he'd shattered. They argued that his mental illness clouded his responsibility, a plea for mercy in the face of an overwhelming tide of facts. But the jury was unmoved. The prosecution rebutted with clarity and force. They called classmates who testified that Rachel had grown increasingly anxious in Daniel's presence, that she had complained about his lingering gaze, his late-night texts, his tendency to appear wherever she went. They showed that Daniel had not simply lost touch with reality. He'd acted with chilling calculation. He had stalked, watched, planned, and finally killed with a methodical purpose no illness could explain away. Throughout the trial, Daniel said little. He listened to the evidence in silence, his expression flickering between resentment and defeat. Occasionally, he glanced at Rachel's parents, but quickly looked away. The only time he spoke was when the judge asked if he wished to address the court. He shook his head, eyes wet but unrepentant. As the trial drew to a close, public fascination reached a fever pitch. News anchors analyzed every detail. Online forums teemed with speculation and outrage. Some blamed the university for lax security. Others dissected Daniel's childhood for clues. But most simply mourned Rachel, a life cut short, a voice stolen. Outside the courthouse, a candlelight vigil grew each night, filling the lawn with soft light and prayers that justice, at least, would not be denied. In the end, Daniel accepted a plea deal. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, voyeurism, and multiple counts of burglary. The sentence: life in prison, no possibility of parole for 30 years. The courtroom remained silent as the judge delivered the verdict. Daniel stood as the bailiff took his arm. He didn't look back at the gallery or the family whose lives he'd destroyed. Instead, as he was led away, he whispered, almost to himself, "She was everything I had." The trial was over, but the scars would remain. Rachel's classmates left court clutching one another, some crying, some vowing to never forget the lesson carved from their loss. That obsession, when left unchecked, could slip into violence even in the safest places. For Ashwood Court, and for all who watched, there would be no return to innocence, only the long, difficult work of learning to trust again. The trial's end brought no sense of resolution, only a quiet, aching emptiness that settled over Ashwood Court and the wider Brookhaven community. Rachel Donovan's story faded from national headlines, replaced by newer tragedies, but within the low brick buildings and the shaded campus, her absence was an unhealed wound. The police packed up their evidence boxes, and the courthouse slowly emptied. Yet, in the months that followed, one truth continued to haunt everyone involved. Rachel's head, arms, and legs were never found. Despite exhaustive searches of landfills, wooded lots, and every outbuilding within a dozen miles, those pieces of her were lost, erased from the world by the same calculated cruelty that ended her life. Detective Lane, who'd once promised Rachel's mother they would bring her home, felt that failure like a stone in her chest. The case file remained open in one narrow respect, pages clipped together and marked, "Remains not recovered." Each June, on the anniversary of Rachel's disappearance, her parents returned to Ashwood. They came not as witnesses, but as pilgrims retracing the final, terrible chapter of their daughter's life. They carried with them a bouquet of peonies, Rachel's favorite, and a pair of soft pink flats, identical to the ones she wore on her last day. Every year, they placed these gentle offerings in front of door 3A, now sealed and unoccupied, a quiet ritual in the hush of early morning. Some years, neighbors left flowers or notes beside theirs. The little memorial would linger for weeks, even as the summer heat wilted the blooms and curled the edges of the cards. Rachel's legacy lingered in other, quieter ways. At Brookhaven Law School, her former professors led a movement to honor her memory. Within a year, they established the Rachel Donovan Promise Scholarship, awarded annually to a student dedicated to pursuing justice for victims, especially those who had been silenced or overlooked. The scholarship was funded by donations from classmates, faculty, and even strangers who'd been moved by Rachel's story. The selection process included not only academic merit, but a demonstrated commitment to community service, traits Rachel embodied every day. The first recipient, a shy first-generation student named Maya, accepted the award at a candlelight ceremony, her voice trembling as she spoke. Rachel Donovan showed us all that fighting for others is the bravest thing you can do. I hope to honor her by never giving up on those who need help the most. The applause that followed was tinged with tears, but also with a sense of hope. Rachel's dreams, in some way, living on. For those who had known Rachel best, grief became a long, uneven road. Naomi, her closest friend, kept Rachel's number in her phone, and sometimes caught herself composing texts, almost forgetting for a moment that there would be no reply. Her boyfriend, Tom, visited Ashwood only once after the trial, standing for a long time in the courtyard, where he and Rachel used to meet before class. He eventually left law school, unable to reconcile his future with the shadow of her absence. In the hallways of Ashwood Court, the sense of community was never quite the same. New students moved in, unaware of the darkness that had once seeped into those walls. Yet old tenants still hesitated before passing door 3A, lowering their voices as if the very air remembered. The building manager replaced the locks, painted over scuff marks, and tried to restore a sense of normalcy. But every creak, every flicker of the hallway lights seemed to whisper of the things lost there. At the university, Professors made time each year to speak candidly about Rachel's case, about safety, boundaries, and the dangers that can hide behind ordinary faces. They encouraged students to trust their instincts, to reach out for help, to take every fear seriously. Rachel's classmates became quiet advocates, checking in on each other, refusing to let anyone slip through the cracks. She was the voice that never stopped fighting, one professor said at a memorial. Now we must be that voice for each other. But the deepest echoes of Rachel's life and her death were quieter still. In the months and years after, other victims came forward, some from Brookhaven, others from distant cities, sharing their own stories of being watched, of feeling unsafe, of not being believed. Rachel's tragedy gave them the courage to speak up. In the silence left behind, her voice somehow endured, rippling outward and inspiring others to demand justice, to refuse to be forgotten. As the seasons turned, the pain softened, but the lessons never faded. Rachel's story became a warning and a rallying cry, a reminder that safety can be fragile, that kindness can be exploited, and that the pursuit of justice is never truly over. Even as the world moved on, the silence of Ashwood Court spoke volumes. In every whispered memory, every small act of courage, Rachel Donovan's light refused to go out. Long after the dust settled at Ashwood Court and the headlines moved on, a small but growing number of people began to look beyond the immediate tragedy. Some asked how such horror could fester beneath the surface of an ordinary college town. Others wondered why, in the face of so many warnings, the system had failed to protect a woman like Rachel Donovan, someone so careful, so disciplined, so beloved. But for those who dug deeper, a more unsettling truth emerged. Rachel's story was not unique. It was a shadow, echoing a real case that still haunted another southern campus and another family years before. In June 2011, in the city of Macon, Georgia, Lauren Giddings was preparing to embark on the next chapter of her life. She had just graduated from Mercer University Law School, a milestone that had cost years of sacrifice, and she was on the brink of her bar exam. Like Rachel, Lauren was known for her intellect, her compassion, and her unwavering sense of purpose. She was the kind of person who inspired others to believe in justice, not just as an abstract idea but as a lived reality. She dreamed of defending the vulnerable, making the law serve those without power. Lauren lived alone in a modest apartment complex close to campus. Her building was a hive of law students, neighbors, friends, occasional rivals, all struggling under the same academic pressures. The days leading up to the bar exam were tense, but Lauren managed her stress with quiet resolve. She kept in close touch with her family, never letting more than a day or two pass without a call or a text. She made plans for the future, sometimes dreaming out loud about a career in public defense, or even teaching law to the next generation. Then, in the last week of June, Lauren's messages abruptly stopped. Her friends grew concerned when she missed a study session. Texts went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. At first, everyone hoped she had simply gone off the grid to study, but by the third day, the worry grew urgent. Her family called the police, who arrived to find Lauren's apartment eerily undisturbed. The door was locked from the inside. Her laptop sat open, notes for the bar exam scattered around it. Nothing seemed out of place, until a sanitation worker, following a trail of foul odor behind the complex, discovered a torso in the trash bin. The body was tightly wrapped in plastic, stripped of any clear identity. The head, arms, and legs were missing. As news broke, shock rippled through Macon and beyond. Police sealed off the building, questioning every tenant. One neighbor, a classmate named Stephen McDaniel, quickly became the focus of suspicion. He was known for being awkward, intensely private, and more than a little odd, but he'd never caused trouble. McDaniel volunteered for interviews, expressing concern and confusion, but beneath the surface, cracks began to show. In a now infamous moment, local TV news cameras caught his reaction live as the reporter revealed that a body had been found. The camera lingered on his face as it drained of color. His jaw clenched. His eyes flickered with something far darker than shock. The police soon found evidence that McDaniel had stalked Lauren for months. Hidden cameras, stolen keys, journals detailing her every move, an entire archive of obsession, masked by the thin veneer of neighborly concern. When confronted with the mounting proof, McDaniel eventually confessed. He had broken into Lauren's apartment in the dead of night, killed her in a panic when she awoke, and meticulously dismembered her body to conceal the evidence. The details were almost too chilling to believe, but the pattern was all too familiar. Like Rachel, Lauren's remains were never fully recovered. Her family still returns to the apartment complex every June, leaving flowers and mementos at her old door, clinging to the fragments of a life cut short by senseless violence. Her case, though solved in the eyes of the law, remains open in the hearts of those who loved her, and in the collective memory of those who study the dangers that obsession can breed. Lauren Giddings's story became a warning, repeated in law school orientations and campus safety seminars around the country. It was a case dissected by criminal justice students and profiled in documentaries. The details, so precise, so personal, so utterly tragic, forced communities to ask difficult questions about privacy, safety, and the thin line between admiration and fixation. But even as the years pass, the pain endures. The Giddings family, like the Donovans in Ashwood Court, live with the reality that the system and the world could not protect the one they loved. In the end, Lauren's legacy became more than a cautionary tale. Her memory inspired changes in campus security, in how police investigate missing persons, in how friends and neighbors watch over one another. She became, for many, a reason to speak up when something feels wrong, to trust instincts, to take every unease seriously. Her story, echoed in fiction and reality, reminds us that darkness can find its way into the safest places, and that the only defense against it is to listen, to believe, and to act, so that no more voices are silenced in the night. Time passed, as it always does, but the silence that settled over Ashwood Court never quite left. Rachel Donovan's story became a quiet refrain, retold in classrooms, whispered at the edges of late-night study sessions, woven into the rituals of the law school she once called home. Her picture hung on the scholarship wall, sunlight glinting off the glass each morning, her smile unchanging even as the world continued to turn. But for the people who lived through it, the friends, the family, the classmates, and neighbors, the echoes of that summer never really faded. Rachel's parents visited Ashwood every June, their pilgrimage a reminder that grief is measured not just in tears, but in the rituals that keep memory alive. They left flowers and her favorite shoes, always together, at the door to her old apartment. They sat for long minutes on the steps, eyes closed, sometimes speaking to her, sometimes just letting the silence speak for them. Some years Naomi joined them, sometimes Tom. Other times, it was just the two of them, wrapped in the kind of quiet only the bereaved truly understand. In the years since the trial, Rachel's story inspired more than just fear. At Brookhaven, her scholarship brought new voices into the fight for justice. Students who might otherwise have gone unheard, each carrying a small piece of her dream forward. Professors told new classes about her drive, her kindness, the way she listened to every argument before offering her own. She became a cautionary tale, yes, but also a symbol of what it meant to care deeply, to believe fiercely in the good that law could do. Other students remembered too. Some became more careful, walking in groups, locking doors, sharing rides home after dark. Others became advocates, speaking up in meetings, pushing for better campus security, for quicker responses to missing person reports, for resources that protected the vulnerable before it was too late. The loss was not only personal, it was communal, a wound that taught hard lessons about trust and vigilance. But the most enduring legacy of Rachel's story, and of Lauren Giddings's before her, was a new understanding of the dangers that can hide beneath admiration. Professors and counselors began to speak openly about the fine line between a crush and an obsession, about the ways boundaries can be crossed long before violence is done. They taught that no one ever deserves to lose their life for being kind, or for turning someone down, or for living in the open. They reminded students and faculty and neighbors that safety was not a guarantee, but a responsibility they all shared. The message spread quietly, but it spread. In dorms and coffee shops, friends checked in on one another. They learned to listen for the silences, the moments when someone pulled back, the subtle signals that all was not well. When rumors bubbled up, or when someone felt watched, people spoke up. They called for help, told someone, refused to let discomfort fester in the shadows. There were false alarms, of course. There were also moments when early action changed everything. A stalker caught before he could do harm, a student who got help before fear turned to tragedy. Rachel's name became part of the larger chorus of voices lost to obsession and violence. At every memorial, her story was joined with others, Lauren's, and those whose cases were never solved or never made the news. The names changed, but the lessons remained. In every city, on every campus, the line between admiration and fixation was drawn again and again, sometimes too late, but always with the hope that telling the story could save someone else. The truth is uncomfortable, and for many, it's easier to look away. But Ashwood Court could never again pretend that evil was something distant or obvious. They knew now that it could wear the face of the boy next door, that it could slip through unlocked doors and trusted routines. They learned that vigilance is not paranoia, that instincts are not to be dismissed, and that speaking up, however awkward or uncertain, is always the right choice. As the years turned, Rachel's voice continued to echo. In law school lecture halls, in the soft click of a lock at night, in the laughter of friends who paused, just a moment longer, to check on one another. Her story, like Lauren's, became a call to action, a gentle insistence that silence protects no one, and that justice is the work of a lifetime. So if you ever feel watched, or uneasy, or alone, trust yourself. Say something. Tell someone. Let Rachel's story, and the stories of all those whose voices were stolen, be a reminder. Your instincts matter. Your voice matters. And no act of courage is ever wasted. May the victims of obsession and violence rest in peace. And if you believe their stories deserve to be told, share them, remember them, and join the fight to keep their memory alive. For in the end, it is not the silence that endures, but the truth that breaks through, demanding to be heard.